Hello, in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about hot sauce and how to choose your ingredients. And I will demonstrate how to make a very easy hot sauce, a basic sriracha, which is quick and simple. The hardest part about it is chopping up the chilies. So if you'd like to make the hot sauce today, following the video, you'll need some chilies, some fresh garlic, vinegar, sugar or other natural sweetener like honey, maple syrup, molasses, or maybe agave. You'll also want a little salt. You'll need a food processor or blender if you would like your hot sauce to be pureed, though you could leave it as a chunky hot sauce if you'd like. And you'll need a saucepan, spoon, and burner for cooking the hot sauce briefly. So chilies, there are a lot of chilies available right now locally, and you can get them in the grocery store, at the farmer's market, or from farmers who have stands along the side of the road. You might even be growing some in your garden. And if you're growing them, then you probably are familiar with their heat levels, flavor profiles, and those kinds of things. But if picking chilies is not something that is familiar to you, I will talk a little bit about that so you can think about what kinds of chilies you might want to use in your hot sauce. As far as heat is concerned, this is important because if you don't like a lot of heat in your foods, you'll want to choose some milder chilies. You can, of course, use just a little bit of hot sauce, but if you choose the hottest chilies, even just a little hot sauce is going to make a very hot dish. So you'll want to think about the heat level of your chilies, and you can do some research if you have particular chilies you're trying to use. But the chart here helps you to think a little bit about some of the chilies that are available, especially locally right now. It really is less about color than it is about the variety. And the heat level can vary from chili to chili based on how long it's been on the vine, how much it's ripened, and then also one plant versus another can be a little bit different. So even if you get 2 jalapeno chilies from the same farmer, it's probably not going to be that much different, but you can find some variation in the heat level depending on even just the plant itself. So these are things to think about. Don't necessarily go too hot then if you don't want a lot of heat. And if you end up with some very hot chilies, you can remove the seeds from inside. You can also cut the thicker part from the inside of the chili. That will help to reduce the heat. And you can also soak your chilies in vinegar and cold water for about 30 minutes to reduce the heat. You could do that before or after you chop them, though it might be a little easier to chop them first and then drain them, because as they soften, they tend to be a little bit harder to chop. They just become messier. As far as flavors and colors are concerned, some things to think about. Every chili has its own flavor profile that is not just about its heat, but also about other aspects. So when you have chilies that are ripening, the deeper colors have ripened more, which means that they will probably be hotter, but it also means that they will have a richer flavor. If you have green chilies and you have chilies of other colors like red, yellow, and orange, you'll find that the green ones will probably have a bit sharper flavor to them. And the ones that are red, orange, and yellow will have a bit of a fruity flavor to them. And then another thing to think about is that when you have chilies that you can find in a green variety, but now they are red, like red jalapenos, for example, the red in those cases are hotter than the green because they've been allowed to ripen on the vine longer. But in general, you shouldn't necessarily think that red chilies are always hotter than green chilies. There are some green chilies that might be hotter. It really depends on the variety that you're using. To give you another example, I got some poblano peppers, which are a very mild chili pepper, at the market this morning, and there were actually some red ones, which is pretty unusual. They're usually picked while they're still green, and you can see that there's a little bit of green in this red poblano, so I'm going to allow it to ripen for a day or two on the countertop before it gets fully red. And then I will do something with it. I'll at least refrigerate it before I use it. So I'm going to expect this red one to be a bit hotter than the green, though poblanos in general are not extremely hot. So these are some of the chilies I got this week. All of the chilies in this bowl I got at Adams Ricky Farmers Market on Thursday. And the yellow ones are lemon drops, which are just a bit citrusy in flavor. And they're fairly hot. Their heat level is around the same as a cayenne. The orange ones are habaneros, so those are very hot. The green ones are serranos, which tend to be hotter than jalapenos. And then this thicker green one is a jalapeno. So the jalapenos are actually the mildest of the chilies that I got at Adams Ricky this week, and the habaneros are the hottest. And then I also have some peppers that I got from the farmer's market on Friday, poblanos that I've showed you, but I also have two varieties of habaneros. I have some Jamaican yellow ones and some yellow or some red ones. And then these that I just have three of are ghost peppers. So those are extremely hot. I will be very careful handling and using those because of how hot they are. If you're not familiar with prepping chilies, I have some guidelines here. I have talked about this in other videos, so this may be familiar to you already. The main thing I would say is if you're handling very hot chilies, I recommend that you wear gloves. I always wear them if I am handling anything hotter than probably a jalapeno. Though even then, I'm very careful, especially not to touch the inside. I will turn, if I'm not using gloves, I will turn the chili with the inside part against the cutting board so that I'm only touching the outer part, which can still be hot, but not necessarily as hot as the inside. I also recommend, like I do with really all produce, that you wash them with vinegar and water. This is the easiest way. Chili peppers are not as bad as some produce for retaining pesticides, but if your chilies have been treated with pesticides, vinegar and water is the best way to help get rid of some of those pesticides, especially to soak for probably 15 to 20 minutes if you really want to try to remove those pesticides. And then otherwise, just basically stem and seed and chop according to the recipes. Another thing to think about for this recipe and also for hot sauces in general is which vinegar you're going to use. Some recipes call for a specific kind of vinegar, and if you have it, you can go ahead and use that. Sometimes you might need to substitute if you don't have the kind of vinegar it calls for, and that's okay too. And that's what this slide is about. It's supposed to help you think about what kind of vinegar you want to use. So plain white vinegar, just the standard that you get in the grocery store, that's the cheapest variety, is sharp and acidic. That may be fine if that's what you're looking for. Know that that's what you're going to get though if you use a white vinegar. If you use any other kind of vinegar that is made from a fruit of some kind or some other kind of plant, like a rice vinegar, you're likely to get a slightly sweeter, less sharp kind of vinegar. And with the fruits, they will also be just a little bit tart. I like to use most of the time either apple cider vinegar or white wine vinegar in my hot sauces, or I might occasionally use rice vinegar if I'm making an East Asian hot sauce, because that's a vinegar that's common in those cultures. So here is the recipe for the hot sauce I'm making today. It's just a basic sriracha recipe, so it's pretty straightforward. if you would like to make the whole recipe, you'll get about 1 cup of hot sauce out of it. And so these are the ingredients that you will need. I am going to make half of the recipe today because I have been making a variety of different hot sauces lately and probably don't need a ton of sriracha right now. In fact, I made some hot sauce last weekend that I can show you if you're interested in fermented chilies later. So I'm just going to make half of the recipe with half a cup of chopped chilies. I'm using habaneros today, all red habaneros, because I like my chilies hot. Oftentimes you'll find that a sriracha might be made with cayenne peppers. You can use those. Those are still hot, but a little bit less hot, and they're fairly easy to find. Or if you don't want a very hot sriracha, you can use something that's lesser. Probably something red is better because sriracha is usually a red pepper or a red sauce. You could use something, a combination of maybe red and orange if you want, maybe some red jalapenos, or something less hot if you really want something mild like a Fresno pepper. You can get those in a red variety. So you basically want to just chop up your chilies and stem them. And then if you want to reduce the heat, seed them as well. And we're going to take all of these ingredients and put them in a food processor or blender and just process them until they are pureed fairly evenly and consistently. This is my half cup of chopped habaneros before I process them. There are a few seeds in here, but I have mostly removed the seeds because habaneros are so hot. I have all of my ingredients in my food processor now. I'm using some maple syrup as a sweetener, and I'm using apple cider vinegar today. So I've transferred my pureed ingredients to a small saucepan, and I'm going to cook my chilies now, cook the hot sauce for about 5 minutes. So my chilies, my hot sauce is cooking right now. And I've talked a little bit about choosing chilies and vinegar. I would just say one thing that I've said in other videos about your sweetener. You want to avoid artificial sweeteners like saccharin because they do not do the job of enhancing the flavors of food like a natural sweetener does. You're actually better off just skipping the sweetener if you really can't put anything natural in it. Even just some fruit juice would be helpful to enhance the flavor. That's really the purpose of the sweetener in this case, is to bring just a little bit of balance and to enhance the flavors of the other ingredients, especially the chilies and the garlic. So think about that as you decide what kind of sweetener you're using. So my chilies are done cooking, and this is a pretty thick sauce. I will probably run this through the food processor one more time now that the sauce is cooked and the chilies are softened a bit. They should puree a little bit better, and so should the garlic, since I just used a mini food processor for such a small amount. You can do the same if you've got a blender or food processor that doesn't do a great job, or if you do a very small batch that makes it hard to get everything pureed. Once the chilies are cooked and the garlic has cooked, they do puree better than they do raw. But it's good to puree them before you cook, because the more of the food that is exposed to the other ingredients, the more surface area is exposed, the more of the flavor will come out. So putting whole cloves of garlic and whole chilies in will not release as much flavor of either of those foods. And very large chunks will also mean that you aren't releasing as much of the flavor into your hot sauce. So you want to process them before cooking for that reason, but you are welcome to process again once it's cooled a bit and get it pureed a bit more. If you find that you would like your sauce to be a little bit sweeter, you can add a little bit more sweetener, you can add a little more salt. You could also add just a little more liquid. It really can vary depending on the kinds of chilies you're using, how liquidy your hot sauce gets. Chilies don't tend to have as much liquid in them as some other fruits do, so you're probably not going to get a ton of liquid from your chilies in the first place. But if you soak your chilies in vinegar ahead, you might find you get a more liquidy hot sauce to start. And you can always add, if you add any water, be very careful to add just a little bit at a time, and do add filtered water. You don't want to just use pure tap water because the minerals in an unfiltered water can affect the flavor. So a filtered water is preferable if you're going to add just a little bit of that, very small increments if you're going to try that, because you'd like your hot sauce to be a lot thinner. So that's the basic sriracha recipe. That will keep in the fridge in an airtight container for a while, since everything's cooked and there's some vinegar and salt in it. And the chilies also have some vitamin C that help things to last, but do keep an eye on it since you're using fresh ingredients. You don't want it to go off. You can freeze it or you can can it if you like to can things, but this is something that I usually just make to have a little bit on hand, which is why I'm only doing half a batch today. There are many other recipes. This is the only one I'm going to share for basic cooked hot sauce recipes. You can look around and find others if you have specific kinds of chilies you want to use or different kinds of things you want to explore. I made a Jamaican jerk hot sauce a couple of weeks ago with a fresh local peach and some yellow chilies. I got some yellow habaneros and some yellow lemon drop chilies that I used in my hot sauce. And I added some Jamaican jerk seasoning for the Jamaican jerk hot sauce. And this is the Jamaican jerk hot sauce. I left this one somewhat chunky with chunks of peaches. It's almost like a chutney, if you're familiar with those kinds of condiments. But if you wanted to do something like this, you could always run it through the food processor again after it's cooked to make it much more evenly processed. So if you're interested just basically in making straightforward hot sauces like the sriracha, then that's probably everything that you'll be interested in this video. The last several minutes, I'm just going to say a couple of things about fermenting chilies for anyone who is interested in making a hot sauce from fermented chilies. So if you're interested in fermenting chilies to make a hot sauce, there are several benefits to doing this. One is that it's going to keep longer because the chilies have been fermented. Another is that fermenting on the countertop at room temperature helps to create natural probiotics in the foods, which are good for your gut. So if you're exploring that kind of addition to your diet and you're interested in probiotic rich foods, fermenting chilies and making hot sauce from those chilies will add a little bit of probiotics to your diet if you're talking to a dietitian about that or just interested in general. So the other thing is that fermenting can help to enhance the flavor as well, because the brine that's salt and water will bring out the flavor of the chilies a bit more before you cook them with the vinegar and other ingredients. So this is a basic fermented hot sauce recipe, and you want to follow the fermenting directions on the right side of the slide before you cook. Cooking is very straightforward, much like the sriracha recipe. The main difference is that now you're using fermented chilies. So for every 1/2 to 1 cup of sauce that you want to make, you're going to need about 1/2 pound of chilies, and weigh them before you chop them. You want to include the stems and everything in the weight. So 8 ounces of chilies, and then once you've weighed them, wash them, and then stem, seed, and chop them. You'll also need 16 ounces of filtered water. As I said just recently, make sure that your water is filtered because the minerals can affect the fermentation process. And then about a half a tablespoon of salt. And then later, when you actually make the sauce, you'll need some vinegar as well. But that's it. It's very straightforward. You chop up the chilies and put them in a sanitized mason jar or other glass jar. And you can just do a quick sanitation if you want by boiling some water and filling the jar to the top with the hot water and then just dumping the water. You could also, if you have another sanitation process, follow that, but that's a basic way. You don't have to take the jar and dip it into boiling water or anything. You can just pour the water into the jar. And then once it's cooled, you can put your chopped chilies in and pack them down as you go. Once you've filled it, you don't have to fill it completely, and you don't want to fill it all the way to the top. You'll want to have about an inch from the top of the jar at least, but it doesn't even have to fill up that much if you don't want it to. It's fine if it's less. And then you'll want to add the brine and make sure that the chilies are covered in brine. You can buy, there are special weights you can buy. You can also buy special lids for mason jars that help you with the fermentation process, but that is absolutely unnecessary, especially if you're doing a short fermentation of maybe a week to try it out. I fermented chilies for hot sauce that I made last week, and I only fermented them for a week. And I did not use any special equipment. I just had a plain mason jar with a regular mason jar lid. And I just checked the chilies every day. And I opened the lid to allow a little air in. I checked to make sure the chilies were still in the brine. And if you need to, you can always stir a little bit to make sure that the chilies are moving through the brine. And just keep doing that. After about 3 to 5 days, you're going to start to see that when you open the jar, if you use a spoon or something else to check the chilies, there's going to be a little bit of bubbling. That's a good sign. That means that your chilies are fermenting properly. It's not a bad thing. The only thing you want to watch for is if you see mold on the top, which is going to be like a whitish gray color. But otherwise it should be fine if you keep it at a temperature of about 55 to 75 degrees. Hotter, you're going to need to be careful, but cool. So I put mine in my basement away from sunlight where the temperature is cooler all the time. And then you can let it go for even 5 to 6 weeks if you want to. If you are going to let it go that long, I do recommend getting special weights, either glass ones or maybe stainless steel, that will help to hold the chilies down in the brine. And you can buy those lids then as well, which means that you don't have to open the lid every day. You can just basically keep an eye on the temperature and nothing else. But you don't need all of that. If you just open it once a day, close it back up again, and the chilies are still in the brine. Ferment it as long as you'd like. 7 days made a nice hot sauce for me. And I just processed everything and then cooked it with the vinegar for about 10 minutes. You can add as much brine as you want. The brine is salty, so the more brine you add, the saltier your hot sauce will be. Likewise, the more vinegar you add, the tartar your hot sauce will be. So you can start out maybe with a 1/4 cup of each and see how it tastes. If you want a little more of either one, you can always add a bit more and let it cook a little bit longer. This is my fermented chili hot sauce, also from Habaneros. And you can see that they pureed really nicely for me because they fermented for a week, so they got nice and soft. So by the time I ran them through my mini food processor, since I made a small batch, it was able to do a really nice job on them. So that is everything I have to say about fermentation. You can give it a try if you'd like. You'll know if the chilies are going off because they will be growing mold on the top. So otherwise, if you see the bubbling and if you see that the water, the brine starts to turn cloudy, that's also a good sign. And then it's going to smell like fermented chilies, like pickled chilies, because you're going to have that typical smell if you know what this kind of food smells like. And then you cook it with the vinegar and you have a nice hot sauce that you can use that'll keep longer, and you'll have some probiotics in your diet. So I hope the video has been helpful and that you enjoy your chilies with hot sauce, and feel free to explore other recipes on the internet or through cookbooks you can get through the library.